Thank you very much for joining me today for this second session on identity and confidence for young people with cochlear implants. Now, this is a recording after the actual event, so this session is primarily for parents to work with them and to support them in any challenges they may have as their deaf children continue to grow. Now, I've said this many times that parenting is the hardest job in the world. So I hope you get some good tips from this session. Now, during what was a live session, we had over an hour, and halfway through, I did stop sharing my screen, and we had a very interesting confidential group discussion about some of the material. I then later resumed with some practical tips. Originally, over 40 parents attended the live session, and this recording is being done so as to maintain confidentiality by not recording the voices that would otherwise have been picked up in a live recording. Now, just a very quick shout out to those people who replied to my emails. I've tried my best to incorporate some of your concerns into this presentation, so thank you for helping me to shape this session. Now, here are some of the main concerns that were raised in the various emails, and I might reflect on some of these to perhaps organise a third or fourth session as follow-ups from this session. In this session, there's quite a lot to cover, but these can also be explored in personal one-to-one therapy sessions with me. If you think this might benefit you, you will find my contact details at the end of this video. So, how did we get here today? I started this initiative called the cochlearimplantcoach.com. It's a concept that I developed and launched about 2 years ago, and I've been slowly raising awareness of the services in and around that. Now, last autumn, I was invited by the Cochlear Implanted Children's Support Group to present at their annual information day. And I met some of you there, and it's amazing that some of you attended the live session of this recording. But before I crack on with today's session, I just wanted to remind you that part one of this workshop is on YouTube. So you can go to YouTube and type something like cochlear implants, identity and confidence, and my video will come up. I hope you find it useful. You might also have seen this video. Now, this video was put together by my friend Kez as part of his Connect with Kez series. Now, during the video cast, we talk about mental health, a topic that's very close to my heart. But again, you can go on Google or any search engine and type Connect with Kez, and you will be able to find all of these episodes there. So let's start with continuing the theme of identity and confidence. Now, whenever I see these Russian dolls, and I have one of these in my therapy room, I use them to demonstrate that we have many layers and that we carry those different experiences from different ages with us. Now, this is why forming and nurturing an identity in a consistent way is so important. And this is to ensure that that identity gradually grows and isn't exposed to any sudden changes or traumatic events. So we can imagine what identity might be comprised of, but let's look at a definition. Identity can be a sense of who we are as individuals and as members of social groups. And it also refers to our sense of how others may perceive and label us. How we sense others perceive and label us does matter, because If we have low self-esteem, we can end up developing negative automatic thoughts and negative core beliefs about ourselves. Some of you might recognize this slide from part one of this series, which is already on YouTube. All of these things form our identity. So it might be helpful to think of your child as an onion. So when you chop an onion down the middle, you see those layers, many layers. From this slide, we have a clear understanding of what identity might consist of. But we also need to be mindful that identity isn't static. It's being added to all the time. So I love this photo. Here's a definition of confidence. According to the Oxford Dictionary, confidence is the mental attitude of trusting in or relying on a person or thing. So firm trust, resilience, faith, that kind of stuff. I would go even further and say it also includes trusting and relying on ourselves. But we only develop this ability if it's nurtured. So with good nurturing, we can achieve confidence and therefore a strong, robust identity. So we can see how identity and confidence go hand in hand. Some of the benefits of confidence include better relationships, being more authentic, being more open. Having confidence can also motivate us to do well because there's less fear of failure when we're undertaking certain tasks or activities. Confidence and having confidence can also help us to manage anxiety. And if we do that well, we'll be less stressed throughout life in general. So all of that helps us to be more resilient, reducing our anxiety in social situations, and ultimately make us happier people. But where do we get confidence from? We get confidence by being encouraged. We get confidence by being enabled to exercise our own autonomy. We get confidence by being allowed to fail. And with that failure, also being open to reflection or providing feedback. So if a child tries cycling, for example, and then they fall off, that's not a reason to chastise the child. That's a reason to encourage the child to try again. And eventually the child will succeed in their cycling, and that will add another layer to their identity. We also get confidence by being conscious of our reactions and challenging those so that the child knows what's desirable in their day-to-day behaviour. Now, it was at this point that I paused the presentation during the live session because I wanted to speak to some of the parents that were present. We had a very interesting discussion about fears for a child's future and issues such as projection onto the child were quite apparent. There were also examples where parents might be catastrophizing a little bit, worried for the future, almost trying to predict the future for their child. Now, on one hand, projection is classed as a defense mechanism and is very much an I'm okay, but you're not okay stance. And this is something that's worth exploring in therapy. Why do we project? Why do we feel the need to project? Issues such as catastrophizing and predicting the future are unhelpful thinking styles, and these can also be explored in therapy. These are just some of the things that came up in the break that we took between the slides. So let's crack on with the rest of the slides. So what I want to do in the remaining slides is I want us to talk about communication and why it matters. This is part of the problem with communication in the 21st century. In more than half of my therapy sessions, social media and the internet is often mentioned. We are addicted and our children are suffering, and we can see evidence of this in nearly every mental health report that gets published concerning young people. I often hear that young people don't want to be a burden, that they don't feel they deserve to be heard. And is it any wonder that they might feel this way when we seem to spend more time on our devices than with them? So I want to spend a bit of time today discussing some basic communications theory. Okay, so as referenced in my previous slide, it almost feels sometimes that as a society we seem to have stopped listening. We would rather text or scroll. Now this is detrimental to the development of social skills in all children, and this isn't limited to deaf children. Deaf children already feel a bit less than because of the ableist society in which we are forced to live in. But also the very idea that hearing loss is something that needs to be fixed. We live in a world where technology, yes, we can now text and access services online. But the truth is, and the statistics prove this, that we are lonelier than we've ever been. So being better at communication can foster a closeness in what is an increasingly lonely world. Now, over the next few slides, we're going to cover some topics, and all of these are designed to improve your relationship with your child. So we're going to look at how we listen. We'll also talk about the levels of listening. And I'll also introduce something known as socratic dialogue. So let's look at the ways in which we listen. There are those of us who listen with our heads. This is especially true when we're talking about facts, when we're sharing information, exploring and comparing arguments, and talking about ideas and general concepts. Sometimes, though, we need to listen with our hearts. So when our children talk about difficult experiences at school, when they hurt themselves and they need comforting, so we pick up on these feelings through the words that they might use, the tone that they might use, the sound of their cry, and also any body language that they might express. But sometimes we're also hearing things that are neither spoken or necessarily conveyed overtly. So we call this intuition, a gut feeling. So for example, if a child is acting oddly or deliberately delaying going to school or implying that they are sick when we know otherwise, this is called acting out. So we need to go with our gut instinct to find out what's wrong. So we do this by asking what's worrying them. Now we'll use something called socratic dialogue in a minute to help you explore this more deeply. So we can listen using our heads, our hearts, and by going with that gut instinct, that intuition. All of these have been developed over millions of years. So when processing facts, you're most likely to engage in communication that will require listening with your head. when sharing personal stories or supporting friends and family and children, you might be listening to each other more with your hearts. Although some parents do struggle with this, especially if they are influenced by their own childhood experiences, where emotional dialogue might not have been encouraged. Now, when you do experience that gut feeling, make sure that you take the time to ask questions such as, tell me how you're feeling. What does it feel like? How can I help you? What can we do to make it better? So these are all the ways in how we can listen. Sometimes we need to question if we're listening with the right thing. So now let's move on to the levels of listening. So we've spoken a little bit about how we might listen. So let's talk a little bit more about the levels at which we listen. So this is called the ladder of listening, and I hope you find it useful. So a good example of when someone is not listening at all is when a friend might tell you that my husband's listening at times is like he is listening to me while he's watching Sky Sports. Many of us might know someone like this or have had that experience of not being listened to. Now, remember the image I showed you earlier of the child on the sofa with two parents on their phones? That child might be processing that particular situation as nobody is listening to me. Another form of listening is listening but waiting to speak. Now, this is evident when we think we're listening but we're not. So, have you ever tried to finish somebody else's sentence? Have you ever interrupted someone? These are examples of listening but waiting to speak. Now, when we do this to our children, they can sense that they're being cut off, and this can stunt their confidence. So they will grow up thinking that this is normal behaviour, and then they will also go on to cut off other people when other people are talking. Quite often in couples therapy, poor communication, especially when it's apparent that there's an unwillingness or inability to listen, is the main factor that causes relationships to break down. So this is why listening is important, because it can actually be detrimental to our relationships. Another way of listening is listening to disagree. This is when the listener pounces, literally pounces, on the weak points being said. Now, I see this in my work quite often, especially when there's evidence of critical parents. Criticising a child is detrimental to their confidence, to their developing self-worth, and of course, the development of their identity. Now, this is important because all these levels play a critical role to confidence in children. Listening to understand is one of the skills of a therapist like myself. So when we're listening in this way, I'm trying to appreciate what someone might be thinking or feeling. As parents of deaf children, you can imagine and sympathise with your child's hearing loss, but empathising is much harder because you don't have their lived experience. And this is why I created the Cochlear Implant Coach, because there is that instant connection between somebody who has a similar lived experience. And this naturally helps us to understand and appreciate a situation much easier and much more naturally. So listening to help others understand is the ultimate in what we can achieve as parents as therapists, as teachers. What this means is that we've processed what others are saying and that we are then able to tailor our response to their needs. So listening to help others understand requires us to give space, to give that comforting eye contact, lots of cuddles, and to help children explore ways that they can express themselves. Now, every time a child feels able to express, this is an investment in their identity and their confidence. Now, I just wanted to put this image here to underline what the last few slides have really been about. It's important that we are being, but also feeling heard. And I think this image is also quite appropriate. I guess as a parent, we should ask ourselves, do I want to bring my fixed view of parenting into my family? Or do I want to adopt a growth mindset, which would bring with it a willingness to understand my unique child and their unique needs? Which brings us to the final topic today. Socratic dialogue is one of the number of tools we use in cognitive behavioural therapy. Now, before I provide some example questions of how I practice Socratic dialogue, or how you might want to practice Socratic dialogue with your child, it's good to understand why it's used. Okay, so I hope you find these following graphics quite explanatory. Now, every day we have feelings which make us think, that make us form new beliefs, and we may need to look up some facts to make sure or to help us make sense of what's happening. Sometimes, working backwards, we're presented with a fact which challenges a pre-existing belief, which makes us think and can really bring up feelings for us. So you can see there that this can work forwards as well as backwards. Sometimes it's the beliefs, which is box number 3, that comes up first, that might make us have a feeling, which is box number 1. And then we have some thoughts, which is box number 2. So all of these things can come in any particular order. Now, children, as we know, either in their excitement or in their individual development difficulties, struggle with this. So practicing this with them and teaching them the differences between feelings, thoughts, beliefs and facts as early as possible is a great foundation for good emotional intelligence. When we understand the difference, we are way more rational. We are more able to trust in our own process and to develop resilience and that strong sense of identity. So, I was going to put together a case study, but for the sake of time, I just want to quickly share with you the key questions that we might ask when a child's behaviour is being guided by a belief that they may have. We all carry beliefs, we all carry core beliefs. Some are helpful, some are not. It could be a belief that they might be bullied. It could be a belief that they're not good enough or that they are not popular. Now, the above list is quite exhaustive and takes considerable practice to perfect. So what I would generally recommend is isolate the child's core belief. Find out why they're being the way they're being. So instead of focusing too much on how they feel, find out what they're believing in that moment. Because once you know what the belief is, you can start to question if there's any evidence for it. Are they basing this on a fact or a feeling? Are they making any assumptions that might give strength to their belief? Because those assumptions also need to be challenged. You might want to ask them in point 5, what do you think your friends would think about you having this kind of belief? In number 6, there may be a risk that they are slightly exaggerating. In number 7, as a parent, you might want to ask, is this a thought that your child has had before? Is it a habitual thought that they have? Or are there facts that support the belief that they have? Sometimes children introject other people's beliefs. So is this core belief the child's own belief? Or might they have introjected a core belief that mum or dad might be carrying around? You might want to do a reality check. What's the worst thing that could happen, even with this core belief? How likely is it that the belief that you have is likely to materialize? It takes time to practice this. This is quite a lot of questioning, but if you can formulate it in a loving, empathic way, it can really help your child to make sense of their own confusion. Because remember, you've got facts, you've got thoughts, you've got feelings, you've got beliefs. It can be difficult to make sense of this. And I guess, looking back on my own lived experience, I wish somebody had challenged my core beliefs as a child. Anyway, I hope you found the session useful. It's the second of what I hope will be a few identity and confidence workshops. As you can see on the screen, for some reason you can see me twice. I don't know why, but on this screen you can see that I have lots of services available. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. So thank you for watching, and if you've got any ideas for a future identity and confidence workshop, please connect with me and share those ideas with me, and I'll see what I can come up with. Okay, thank you for watching. Bye for now.